The dog by the crib voiceover style intro. They found him there. Just before dawn, a shadow of fur and silence, curled beside the crib he refused to leave. The house had long since gone quiet. The walls still smelled of smoke, but the dog, he stayed. This is the story of what he waited for. This story will break you, and then rebuild you. Like, share, and tell us, where in the world are you watching from today? I don't know how long he'd been there. The German shepherd lay like a statue of grief, head low, ears tipped slightly back, body curled tight beneath the pale light of the nursery window. The baby's crib sat inches away, empty, still, and yet, the dog wouldn't move. I remember standing in the doorway that first morning, boots soaked from the wet grass outside, flashlight still in hand. The floorboards creaked beneath me, but the dog never turned. He just stared at the crib, as if expecting something, or guarding something he couldn't bear to lose. The rain hadn't stopped all night. It tapped against the cracked panes, gentle but relentless, like a memory that refuses to be forgotten. The room smelled faintly of smoke and lavender. I saw a baby blanket draped over the crib rail, pale blue, frayed at the edges, the kind someone once tucked in every night with quiet hands and whispered prayers. The dog's fur was matted in places. One paw twitched when I stepped closer, but still, he didn't rise. I could see the tension in his shoulders, not fear, not aggression, just something heavier, older. Like waiting had become part of his bones. He wasn't chipped, no collar, but I saw the imprint of one, faded into the thick fur of his neck, a pale ring of loss. I reached out once, slowly. He didn't growl, didn't flinch. He just looked up at me, eyes dark and still, like a lake before a storm, and in that moment, I knew. He wasn't here by accident. This wasn't just a dog. This was a soul standing guard over something broken. The baby wasn't there. Not yet. The room was cold. The power had been out for days, and the rest of the house had been cleared after the fire. But no one had been able to coax him out. Not the firefighters. Not the shelter workers. Not even animal control. He wasn't leaving, so I sat down, right there on the nursery floor, just a few feet away from him. Rain still in my hair, boots still soaked. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just breathed, slowly, softly, like maybe, if I were quiet enough, the room would tell me what happened, and eventually it did. It began with the smallest sound, not a bark, not a growl, just a soft exhale. The dog rested his chin against the floor, eyes still fixed on the crib, and for the first time, he let his body soften, only slightly, just enough to know. He'd been holding this weight for a long time. I stayed until the light began to shift, pale blue warming into gray. And still, he didn't leave the crib. There was no name tag to read. No one had claimed him. No one had come looking, but I started calling him Ash, because that's what clung to his coat, and that's what the house had become. A shell of something once warm, something once lived in. Ash didn't look at me again that day. He didn't have to. Somewhere in the quiet, in the stillness of that ruined room, I already knew. This dog was holding on to something I hadn't yet seen, and I wasn't going to leave him behind. A house that remembers the morning after I first met Ash. I returned to the house with 2 blankets and a thermos of black coffee. The air was colder than it had been the day before, and the kind of quiet hung over the neighborhood that makes you feel like you're the only one left listening. No police tape anymore. No more clipboards or investigators pacing back and forth. Just me. And him. Ash was still there, in the exact same spot, folded into himself like something pressed into the corner of a page. The crib still stood silent beside him. Pale bars catching the early morning light, like ribs. The blue blanket was unchanged, unmoved. Dust had begun to settle in the creases. He looked up when I entered this time, only slightly, just enough to let me know he saw me. Still, he didn't rise. I didn't expect him to. I laid one blanket down near the doorway and wrapped the other around my shoulders, then sat again. Same as before, quiet, patient. There's a kind of reverence you have to hold around a dog like him, not because he's dangerous, but because he's grieving. You can see it in his posture, the way his eyes didn't blink too often, the way his body held tension, even when still. It reminded me of people I'd seen in hospital waiting rooms, those who sat for hours without speaking, watching doors that never opened. He wasn't guarding the house. He wasn't even guarding the crib. He was waiting for what? I didn't know. I stayed until the wind outside shifted direction, and the smell of ash from the back hallway stirred again, a cold memory pushing its way in through cracks in the walls. Something had burned here, badly, but the nursery had been spared. Not entirely untouched, but intact enough to hold on to what remained. The rest of the house, though you could feel it, the soot had settled into the wood like old guilt, and yet no one had returned. No mother, no father, no family, no one but ash. I didn't explore much that day. I didn't want to break the stillness, but I did take a few careful steps into the hallway just outside the nursery, flashlight in hand. The floor groaned beneath my weight, and dust stirred with every breath. There was a framed photo on the ground, cracked glass, but the image inside mostly intact. A woman holding a baby, face turned slightly away from the camera, as if caught mid-laugh. You couldn't see the man's face beside her. It was just out of frame, but a hand rested gently on her shoulder. The baby was small, maybe 6 months, wrapped in something light, a blue blanket, the same one in the crib. I crouched slowly, careful not to disturb the frame more than I had to, and picked it up. The woman's eyes were bright, but there was a kind of tiredness behind them, the kind you only learn to recognize after seeing enough people who've loved too hard, too long. There was no date, no names. I glanced back toward the nursery. Ash was still watching me, but now, for the first time, he had shifted position. His front legs were stretched out in front of him, his head upright. He didn't look panicked. He looked aware, and in that moment I realized something. He wasn't just staying near the crib. He was tracking me, not with fear, not with protectiveness, but with a kind of searching, as if something in me reminded him of someone else. I lowered myself back down to the floor, placing the photograph between us. He didn't move toward it, didn't sniff or react, but I saw the way his eyes fell on it, quiet, still. This dog knew them, whoever they were. Ash wasn't stray. Not really. Maybe legally, sure, no microchip, no registration. But this wasn't a dog who'd wandered into a burned-out house to take shelter. This was a dog who had stayed behind, who had refused to leave after everything else had already ended. And that raised a question I wasn't ready to answer. Why hadn't he been taken with them? I remember leaning my back against the doorframe then, knees pulled slightly to my chest. I sipped the coffee, now lukewarm, and just sat with him, with the silence, with the weight of a house that still remembered. The wind shifted again, this time colder. A faint whistle through a cracked window somewhere down the hall. Ash blinked slowly. Then, and only then, he stood, not all the way, not with speed, but enough to stretch his limbs, shake the stiffness from his coat, and step forward 3 slow paces. He came to the photo first, lowered his nose, breathed once, twice. Then, with a heaviness I'll never forget, he lay down again, this time, halfway between me and the crib, as if bridging something, as if saying, "You're part of this now." I didn't touch him, not yet, but my hand rested gently on the floor between us, open, palm down, a gesture that said, "I see you," a gesture that asked for nothing. We stayed like that for hours. Eventually, I had to leave, just for a moment. I told myself. To bring food, maybe a water dish. I knew if I left him overnight again, without offering something tangible, I'd be failing the quiet trust that had started to form between us. I left the blanket folded near the crib. I left the photo propped carefully against the wall. I told myself I'd be back before dark. The drive back was short. The town wasn't large, and I didn't live far, but the whole way, my mind kept drifting to the woman's face in the photo, the way Ash had moved only after watching me handle it, the blue blanket, untouched, the crib, silent. There were too many pieces, and no names to anchor them to. I stopped by the shelter on the way, the one I volunteered at on weekends. They hadn't taken in any dogs matching Ash's description, but I left a flyer anyway, just in case someone came asking. Back at home, I filled a metal bowl with fresh water, packed a Tupperware with soft chicken and rice, and grabbed an old leash I'd kept for years, not to restrain him, just to offer, if needed, a symbol more than a tool. When I returned to the house, night was beginning to pull its dark coat over the sky, but the nursery light, that faint, diffused gray-blue glow, still lingered, and Ash was waiting, same place, same position, only now his head was resting on the edge of the crib's leg, like a sentinel grown tired, but not broken. When I stepped into the room, he lifted his eyes to mine, and this time, when I crouched to place the bowl near him, he didn't flinch. He sniffed once, ate slowly, deliberately. Then, and this was the moment I didn't expect, he turned back toward the crib and lay beside it again, not curled, not tense, just ... Watching something told me that crib hadn't been empty for long, that whoever had slept there had done so with Ash curled nearby, a quiet guardian, night after night. And even now, with the house abandoned and the world outside forgetting, Ash hadn't moved on. He wouldn't, because someone had left, and someone, he believed, might still come back. It rained again that night, not hard, just a slow, steady whisper against the roof, like fingers brushing against a closed door. I sat in the nursery with Ash, my back to the wall and the old blanket still wrapped around my shoulders, listening to the rhythm of water finding its way through cracked gutters and clogged drain pipes. Every now and then, I'd hear a creak from somewhere deeper in the house, the kind of sound that didn't ask for attention, but made sure you remembered you weren't alone. Ash barely moved. He'd eaten earlier, slowly and methodically, and then returned to his post beside the crib. One paw stretched just beneath the crib's wooden slats, as if reaching toward something he could still feel, a presence, a warmth. The water dish sat untouched now. The room had darkened, but not completely. That kind of night carries its own kind of light, dim, silvered, full of shapes that only exist in half-memory. I found myself studying him more than I should have, not just the contours of his body, but the quiet narrative he seemed to hold in every inch of his being. There were scars along his flank, old ones, not the kind left by street fights, but by something less violent, more enduring, the kind of scars that come from protecting something, again and again, even when no one sees. His eyes would occasionally flick toward the window, as if expecting movement, but each time, he'd return his gaze to the crib, unmoved by what the world outside had to offer. I whispered once, a soft, "Good boy," not expecting a response. Ash didn't turn, but something in his breath changed. A longer exhale, a loosening, just enough for me to feel it. I didn't try again. Some grief doesn't want to be comforted, it just wants to be seen. I spent the next morning doing something I hadn't done in a long time, walking without a destination. There's a part of town that curves around the old Mill Road, the kind of place where the trees grow too close to the sidewalks and mailboxes lean a little left or right, depending on the season. I found myself there with a stack of photocopied flyers under my arm and tape clutched in a cold, stiff hand. "Found dog" was printed in bold across the top. Beneath, a blurry photo I'd taken of Ash from the hallway. It wasn't great, the lighting too dim, the angle too low, but his silhouette was unmistakable. Proud, still, watching. I posted them anywhere someone might notice. Gas stations, stop signs, grocery store windows. A few neighbors offered polite nods. One or two asked if he'd bitten anyone. When I said no, they seemed surprised. Most people didn't ask anything at all. By the time I returned to the house, the sky had clouded over again. Not rain this time, just that gray heaviness that feels like it might never break. Ash was waiting, in the same place. But something had changed. The photo, the one I'd propped against the wall the day before, the one with the woman holding the baby, had been knocked slightly askew. Not much. Just enough that I noticed. I looked at Ash. He met my gaze, then turned his eyes back toward the crib. The blue blanket had shifted. Again, not by much, but these were the kinds of details you started to notice when you spent hours in a room where nothing moved. I crossed slowly to the crib and crouched beside it. The air here felt different, warmer, as if memory itself had a temperature. I reached for the blanket, fingers brushing over its worn edge. Soft, frayed, with a small embroidered patch near the corner. A lamb, faded but still intact, and beneath, it tucked barely into the edge of the mattress, I found it. A pacifier, yellow, cracked along one side. The kind sold in packs of 3. The kind that vanish into couch cushions and jacket pockets and glove compartments, only to be found months later, when everything else has changed. I held it in my hand and looked at Ashdot. He was watching me again. Eyes not curious, but alert, measuring. "I'm not here to take anything," I said quietly, "just trying to understand." It felt strange to speak aloud in that room, like raising your voice in a church after hours. I set the pacifier gently on the crib's edge and sat down again, this time a little closer to Ash, still not touching, still letting the space between us exist on his terms. That evening, I dreamed something I hadn't dreamed in years. A hallway, long, empty, a door at the end, and behind it, a cry, small, frantic, not desperate, but lost. I woke up with the weight of it still in my chest. The kind of weight you carry when something once belonged to you and then didn't. Not taken, not stolen, just gone. I showered, made coffee, took the same path back to the house, and found Ash exactly where he'd been. But this time, when I entered, something felt different. There was hair on the floor, a small patch, tufts of thick, black fur, clumped together near the corner of the crib. Signs of struggle. No, not recent. More like a place worn down by weeks, maybe months, of lying in the same place. Ash didn't greet me. He didn't need to. His presence was the greeting. I brought new food, a softer blanket. I spoke less now, watched more. Sometimes silence tells you more than words ever could. And on the 5th day, something happened. Ash stood when I entered. Not urgently, not protectively, but with purpose. He walked to me, not all the way, just far enough that his body was no longer between me and the crib, far enough that he was no longer shielding it, and in that small gesture, I felt it, a kind of permission. Letting go, not of grief, but of suspicion, as if something in him had finally accepted that. I wasn't here to take what he'd been guarding. I crouched, waited, and Ash stepped closer. His nose touched my knee, light, barely there. Then he turned and walked into the hallway, stopped, looked back, and for the first time since I'd met him, it felt like he was asking something of me not to follow. Not yet, but to notice too. Understand that the story didn't begin in the nursery, that whatever had happened here started before. The first time I followed Ash down that hallway, I moved like someone stepping through a memory that didn't belong to them. The house was colder outside the nursery, Not just in temperature, but in feeling. The way light moved through the broken blinds, fractured and pale. The way the air shifted around the doorframes, carrying whispers of things unspoken. Ash walked slowly, his nails barely clicking on the old wooden floor. He didn't turn back to see if I followed. He knew I would, and I think he also knew I wouldn't speak. There are moments that feel like a held breath, and this was one of them. The hallway was narrow. On one side, faded wallpaper peeled like tired skin. On the other, photographs hung in crooked silence. Not many, but enough. Dust gathered along their edges like frost. The faces inside were smiling, mostly. A man with soft eyes, a woman holding a baby close to her chest, and in one photo, small and slightly out German Shepherd, half turned toward the camera, ears alert. Ash. He stopped beneath that photo. Not long, just enough to let me notice it, enough to let it land. Then he turned left, toward a door that was barely cracked open. The nursery had always felt like a sanctuary, despite its silence. But this room felt like a wound. Ash stepped inside first. I hesitated at the threshold, hand brushing the doorframe. The smell was different in here. Less smoke, more time. The kind of stale air that gathers when people leave quickly, not knowing they won't return. There was a twin bed, neatly made, but sunken in the center from use. A chair in the corner, a dresser, top drawer, left slightly open. I stepped in, carefully. The floor creaked under my weight, and Ash moved to the far side of the room, lying down next to the chair like it was his post, like it always had been. I knelt in front of the dresser and pulled the drawer open slowly. Inside were the quiet markers of a life paused mid-sentence, a folded pair of socks, a child's hospital bracelet, a strip of ultrasound photos. They were brittle with age, edges curled. I picked them up with both hands, holding the strip like it might fall apart if I breathed wrong. The last image was the clearest. A tiny profile, barely formed, floating in shadow. Next to it, a name had been handwritten in soft ink. Milo. Not the mother's name, not the father's, the child's. A boy. I looked up. Ash was watching me, still unmoving. I didn't speak, just nodded once, a kind of promise I hadn't realized I was making until it left me. I replaced the photos carefully, but not before noticing something else tucked at the back of the drawer, an envelope, sealed but unaddressed. The paper was yellowed, and there were fingerprints pressed into the back. Faint, but real. I didn't open it. Some things aren't meant to be rushed. Instead, I stepped back from the drawer, stood, and took in the rest of the room. The window had been taped from the inside, likely from an old draft. The wallpaper here had peeled too, but beneath it, a child had drawn something on the wall, in crayon. A house, a dog, a tall figure beside them, and a small handprint in blue, pressed low on the wall, like a signature. I reached out without thinking, and touched it. The cold plaster beneath felt like stone. Ash let out a breath, then deep, slow, not quite a sigh, and for the first time, I saw his body truly relax. His front paws stretched out, head resting flat between them. His eyes blinked, then closed. Only for a moment. But it was enough. He was showing me not just the room, but the story, piece by piece. The door across the hall was next. Ash stood again when I moved, not because he was leading now, but because he trusted me to see the rest. This room was different, sterile, sparse, the kind of space people use when they're too tired to keep pretending everything's normal. A mattress without a frame, a folding chair near a window, a pill bottle on the floor, empty, label faded beyond reading. There was nothing for Ash to look at here, nothing he lingered on. This wasn't the room he remembered. This wasn't where his loyalty lived. But mine did, in some quiet way, because for the first time, I felt it in my chest. That sharp ache, that has no name. This wasn't just a house. It was a grief that had been folded into drywall in silence, and someone had walked away from it. Not by choice, but by necessity. I sat in the empty chair and stared out the window for a long time. The trees outside barely moved. Rain had started again, soft, uncertain, the kind that falls through branches, instead of onto them. Ash didn't follow me this time. He returned to the nursery on his own. I heard his nails against the hallway, the soft thud of his body settling again by the crib. The message was clear. This house had given what it had to give. For now, I started staying longer after that. Every day I brought something small, a clean towel, a sweater I didn't wear anymore. Once an old stuffed bear I'd found in a box in my attic. No eyes, but soft. Worn in that way only children know how to make something feel like home. I placed it in the crib. Ash didn't move for nearly an hour. Then he stood, walked over, and lowered his nose to the bear's chest. He didn't touch it, but he stayed beside it the rest of the night. I kept searching, quietly, carefully, through public records, online archives. Even an old friend who worked in fire response. The house had caught fire, yes, but not from an explosion or accident. A space heater left on too long. Electrical wiring not up to code. There had been no fatalities reported, but the family, they were never named, just listed as displaced. That word haunted me. Displaced, like furniture, like wallpaper, like things that no longer belonged where they once lived. But Ash had stayed, because he belonged nowhere else. On the 7th day, something changed. I had brought a second blanket, heavier, deep green. I laid it on the floor beside the crib, like I always did, folding it into a small square. Ash didn't move to it. He stayed where he was, but the moment I sat, something in him shifted. He rose, walked toward me, and lay down at my side. No tension, no distance. His body pressed gently into mine, shoulder to shoulder, and I knew then, without question, he had chosen, not to forget, but to trust. A beginning, in the ruins of something that would never quite end. Ash was curled against me when I woke, not in the warm, easy sprawl of a house dog used to soft couches and lazy mornings, but in the way you sleep when your body has learned to stay alert, even at rest. His back pressed against my ribs, head lifted the moment I stirred, not anxious, just aware, present. The crib sat in its corner, unchanged. The blue blanket still neatly draped over one edge, the stuffed bear still upright beside the pillow. The room had become a rhythm, measured, quiet, familiar. I knew how the light filtered through the window at each hour. I knew the exact pattern of floorboards that would creak underfoot. And Ash, he knew it all, long before I did. That morning, there was a new sound, not loud, not sudden, but different. I heard it as I stood and stretched, blanket falling from my shoulders. It was barely more than a hush, a shift in the air, a breath against wood, a creak not caused by either of us. Ash heard it too. His head turned sharply toward the door. His ears lifted, not in alarm, but in something more focused, a kind of stillness that felt electric. His entire body stilled. I followed his gaze. Nothing there, just the open nursery door, the empty hallway beyond. But something had passed through. I felt it in the base of my spine, in the way the air cooled without wind. Ash rose, slowly, deliberately, and stepped out into the hall. I followed. There was no rush to his movements, no aggression. He wasn't chasing anything. He was tracking something unseen, something remembered. His nose hovered just above the floor, pausing once near the photo wall, then again by the hallway's midpoint, near a faint smudge on the floorboard's eye. Hadn't noticed before. AHAND-PRINT. Small, faint, almost gone. Ash stood over it, looked up at me, then moved on. I didn't speak. Not here, not now. We passed the bedroom, where the ultrasound photos still lay in their drawer. The chair still turned. slightly toward the window. We passed the second room, the one that felt hollowed out, abandoned too early, and then, at the end of the hall, we stopped. It was a closet, one I hadn't opened. The door was partially ajar, enough to see the edges of cardboard boxes inside. The dull glint of something metallic, maybe an old toy, maybe nothing. I reached for the handle. Ash stepped back just one step, not out of fear, out of respect. I opened the door slowly. Inside, the smell was different, sweeter, almost not the rot of abandonment, not the sharp temps of mildew or smoke. Something softer, powder, dried flowers, fabric, blankets, toys, long untouched, some still with price tags. A small mobile, shaped like stars, tangled in its own string, and near the back, set gently atop a folded flannel sheet. A photograph. This one was newer. A baby in a hospital bassinet, swaddled, sleeping. A date in the corner. Just over a year ago. His name was handwritten in the margin. The ink slightly smudged from age or touch. Milo. There he was. Not imagined. Not a ghost. A real child. A living presence. Or, once living. But I didn't feel absence in that closet. I felt. Waiting. Ash stepped forward again, sat beside me, his head low, eyes on the photograph, and then I heard it. A sound from the nursery, faint, a breath. A shift. I turned. The air down the hall felt different, like it was being held, like the walls themselves were listening. Ash moved first, and I followed. Back through the hallway, back through the slow narrowing of light and shadow and silence, back to the room, where everything had started. The nursery was empty, as before, the crib untouched. But something was different. The stuffed bear had fallen over, and the blue blanket, the one that hadn't moved in over a week, was bunched slightly, as if tugged. Ash stood at the edge of the crib, motionless. Then, slowly, gently, he rested his front paws against the frame, lifting himself just high enough to peer over. I waited behind him, barely breathing. He held that position for nearly a full minute, then lowered himself, turned, and looked at me. There was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Recognition, and a kind of peace. I hadn't known he was missing. Ash curled beside the crib, head resting along the baseboard. His breath slowed, and then I saw it. The smallest thing, a single handprint, impossibly small, fogged into the inside of the nursery window, low, barely there, fading, as I watched. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat beside Ash in the corner of the nursery, my back to the wall, listening to the steady rhythm of his breath and the even quieter stillness that filled the room. No creaks, no distant rumbles of thunder, just silence, deep and reverent. There are moments you can't explain, not fully, not with logic or language, but you feel them, you carry them, and this was one. Ash had shown me what he could. The rest would come when it was ready. The next morning, there was movement outside. I opened the front door, just enough to peer out, expecting maybe a neighbor, a delivery, or the wind dragging fallen leaves across the porch. But it was a woman, maybe younger, though her posture made her look older, shoulders hunched against the chill, a scarf pulled close to her chin. She held a flyer in one hand, mine, and was staring at the house like it belonged to a dream she hadn't meant to wake from. She didn't step forward, didn't knock, just stood there. Ash stood beside me, watching her. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He sat, then let out a sound I hadn't heard from him before, a low, soft whine, not of fear, not of excitement, something in between, recognition, maybe or grief. I didn't open the door wider, not yet. The woman looked up, not at me, but beyond me, toward the hallway, toward the nursery, then turned, folded the flyer into her coat pocket, and walked away. She didn't look back. Ash didn't follow, but he stayed by the door, long. After she disappeared from view, his ears, twitched once. His eyes stayed on the horizon, and I wondered, not for the first time, if this was what loyalty looked like after the ending. Not a return, but a witness. That afternoon, Ash lay beside the crib again, and I saw it barely visible in the folds of the blue blanket, a single hair dot fine, pale, not his, a baby's, still clinging, still here, still waiting. The next morning, the nursery felt warmer, not by degrees, not in any way the thermostat would register, but in that intangible way. A room can shift when something invisible has returned to it, like breath, like memory, like hope, fragile and just barely daring. Ash was lying beneath the crib again, his chest rising and falling with steady, almost meditative rhythm. His head rested on the folded edge of the green blanket I had brought. Days earlier, the one he hadn't touched until he'd chosen to trust me. I sat nearby, my back against the opposite wall. A part of me wanted to move closer, to rest my hand against his ribs and remind us both we weren't alone. But I didn't. Not yet. This moment was his. The blue blanket in the crib was still bunched slightly, the stuffed bear slumped gently against the far rail. The pacifier I'd once found hidden in the folds had been nudged again, no longer tucked away, but closer to the edge, visible, present. Ash's ears flicked at the sound of my breath, but he didn't lift his head. I watched the window. No fogged handprint today, just condensation clinging like dew. But I kept looking, not because I expected anything, but because some part of me needed to. It was then I noticed what had changed. The photograph, the one I had found days ago, the hospital bassinet, Milo's name in the corner. It was no longer in the closet where I'd left it. It was resting now beneath the crib slats, half tucked beneath Ash's paw. He had moved it, brought it to the one place in the house he had never left. That afternoon, I took Ash outside, not far, just to the small yard behind the house, where the grass had grown thick with neglect and vines curled like question marks around the edges of the chain-link fence. The wind was sharp, scented with rust and wet leaves. He hesitated at the threshold of the back door, looked back, not at me, but toward the nursery. Only after a long moment did he cross the doorframe, pause, stepping slowly into the overgrown grass. He moved with caution, not because he feared what was outside, but because for so long his duty had been inside, and some instincts refused to loosen their grip all at once. I walked behind him. No leash, no commands, just presence. Ash sniffed the air, turned a slow half-circle near an old flower bed, and sat beside a stone I hadn't noticed before, flat, weather-worn. No more than a foot wide. There were scratches on it, faint, uneven, not etched professionally, carved by hand. I knelt there, nearly lost beneath moss and time. Nothing more, just that single letter. Ash lowered his head and rested it beside the stone, and I understood. Maybe this wasn't a grave. Maybe it wasn't even meant as a marker. Maybe it was just a symbol, something left behind when words were too much. A letter for a name too painful to speak aloud. Milo. Later that night, I brought a new blanket into the nursery. Soft flannel, the kind made for winter, thick enough to hold warmth, even after the heat left the room. I laid it in the crib, folding it neatly over the mattress, smoothing the creases with my palms. Ash watched from the doorway, unmoving. I didn't expect him to respond, but after I sat back down, quiet, waiting, something changed. He stood, walked forward, and for the first time, placed his front paws gently, reverently, against the side of the crib. He didn't look at me. He looked inside, and then, slowly, he rested his chin on the railing. I heard it then. Not a voice, not a cry, just the softest rustle, as if a body turned over in sleep. I didn't move. Ash didn't either, but I saw the way his eyes closed for just a breath, and I realized this wasn't just protection anymore. This was remembrance. This was presence. This was devotion reborn as purpose. Over the following days, Ash's movements changed. He began following me room to room, not like a dog trailing its owner, but like a companion keeping pace with something he wasn't quite ready to name. He walked slowly, always pausing at thresholds. He'd stop by the photo wall, gaze at the crooked frame with the smiling woman and out-of-frame man. He'd stand near the hallway closet, the one where soft scents still lingered beneath old cardboard and flannel. But every time, he returned to the crib, to the space where he had chosen to stay. It became a rhythm. Morning walks to the stone, behind the house. Midday naps beneath the window. Evenings curled beside the crib. A quiet choreography of loyalty. One night, just after dusk, I saw something I didn't expect. Ash was lying beside the crib, as usual. But his body was curved slightly, protective, braced. I could barely see it at first. Then I leaned closer. There, nestled against the side of his chest, was the bear. The stuffed one I'd placed in the crib days earlier. Ash had taken it gently, silently, and brought it down beside him, and resting on top of the bear, as if it had been placed there with intention. The pacifier. No noise, no movement, just stillness. And two objects, cradled between the paws of a dog who had lost everything, and still waited. My hand pressed gently to the floor, open, near him. Ash didn't move, but his tail twitched once, a small, silent wag. That same night, I dreamt of the nursery, only this time, it wasn't empty. There was a crib, and inside it, the softest sound, a sigh, a shift, not quite crying, not quite sleep, just breath. I reached for the edge of the crib in the dream, but my hand stopped just short of touching, because I knew I wasn't the one he was waiting for. When I woke, Ash was standing at the window, his reflection faint in the glass. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting pale gold across the far wall, and in that glow, I saw it again, the outline of a handprint, clearer this time, still small, still impossibly real, and just beneath it, a single smear, like the tip of a nose, pressed briefly to the glass notch, looked back at me, eyes soft, unreadable dot, then returned to the crib, and I finally understood. This wasn't haunting, this was home, this was love, UNFORGOTTEN. The wind changed again the next morning. It came in through the cracked nursery window, not enough to chill the room, but enough to stir the edges of the flannel blanket in the crib, a gentle ripple, like something breathing beneath it. Ash lifted his head at the same moment I noticed. He didn't move toward it, just watched, still, reverent that the pacifier was on the floor again. I'd left it tucked beside the stuffed bear the night before. When I'd woken, it had been moved, not far, just a few inches forward, nudged so softly that the dust beneath it still held the crescent outline of where it had rested before. Ash remained in his usual spot, his chin pressed lightly to the floor, his eyes alert but calm. I hadn't seen him sleep deeply in days, not since the first sound in the hallway. He closed his eyes sometimes, yes, but never fully, never long. He wasn't resting, he was listening, and maybe I was, too. That afternoon, I returned to the backyard. I hadn't planned to, but something about the air had shifted. The sun hung low behind the clouds like an old lantern, and the ground felt soft beneath my boots. I moved slowly, brushing tall grass from my path, and stepped once more toward the stone Ash had shown me. The letter M still held, still waiting. I knelt and brushed the moss from its edge. There was something delicate in the act, not cleaning exactly, but revealing, honoring behind me. I heard the soft sound of movement, pause through grass. Ash was there. He didn't stop beside me this time. He moved past, just a few steps, toward the far end of the fence, where the grass grew tallest, and there, partially hidden beneath a collapsed section of wire, a child's toy, A rattle, wooden hand-painted. The colors faded by weather and time. The handle cracked slightly from exposure. Ash sniffed it, then sat beside it. Looking down, I didn't touch it, not yet, but I stood near. Ash stayed there for nearly an hour, unmoving, the rattle between his front paws. And I wondered, had Milo dropped it? Had someone placed it there, once, in a moment of heartbreak? Or had Ash carried it there himself, in the days after? Whatever the truth, the meaning was the same. He was gathering the pieces, bringing them back, later that day. Someone came to the house. I heard the truck before I saw it, an old model engine rattling gently like bones in winter. It pulled up slow along the curb, and a man stepped out, middle-aged, work boots, denim jacket, one hand tucked into the pocket of his jeans like he wasn't sure if he should be here at all. I stepped out onto the porch. We didn't speak right away. He looked past me, toward the side of the house, then down at the flyer he still held in one hand, my flyer. The one with Ash's silhouette and the word found in block letters across the top. "Didn't think it was real," he said finally. His voice was worn, not from age, from use. I nodded. "I understand." He looked down again, as if reading the flyer for the first time. "Dog like that," he murmured. "They don't usually wait. Not this long." I said nothing. Ash had appeared behind me in the doorway, silent as ever. The man's eyes lifted, locking onto him, a long pause. Then, the barest whisper, "You stayed." His voice cracked. He looked away. I studied his face. There was something unfinished there. Not regret, not guilt, distance, like someone who had once belonged to this place but no longer dared claim it. "Do you know him?" I asked gently. He hesitated. "No," he said. Then after a beat, "But I knew her, a while back." "Who?" "The mother, before she moved in here, before all this." He gestured vaguely to the house, to the yard, to the silence. I saw the flyer. Didn't know what to do with it. I nodded slowly. "Thank you for coming." He didn't step closer. Just looked at Ash again. "He was with her every day," the man said, almost to himself. "From what I remember, never left her side, even when she started pulling away from everyone else." Another pause. I think he was all she had left, near the end. He turned to go, slowly. Before he reached the truck, I called out, "Do you remember her name?" He stopped, shoulders tight. Then, without turning, he said, "Claire." Then he drove off. That night, I lit a single candle in the nursery. I don't know why. Maybe to keep watch. Maybe to remember. Maybe just to soften the dark. Ash lay beside the crib, as always. But the bear was back inside, the pacifier tucked beside it, the flannel blanket now folded, not crumpled. Someone had tidied, not me. I watched the candle flicker. The flame's light cast long, slow shadows along the wall, and in one moment, just a breath, I thought I saw a figure seated beside the crib, head bowed, hands folded, but when I blinked, it was gone, and only Ash remained, eyes open, watching the days blurred after that. Ash began moving with more certainty, not quickly, never with haste, but with intention. He carried the rattle inside, laid it beneath the crib. He pawed gently at the closet door one morning, waiting until I opened it. He curled once, just once, on the green blanket I'd placed for him, as if to say, "This is where I'll be now." 2. The silence between us became something sacred, not emptiness, understanding. One evening, as the sun began to set, I saw something I hadn't expected. A neighbor, the first I'd seen in weeks, walked past the house. A little girl held her hand, no older than 4, curls bouncing as she skipped unevenly on the sidewalk. She paused near the gate, pointed to the nursery window. "Doggy," she whispered. Her mother hushed her gently, pulling her away, but the girl turned again, and said, almost to herself, "Baby, too." Then they were gone. That night, Ash didn't sleep by the crib. He stood beside it for hours, watching something I couldn't see, and when he finally lay down, he let out a long, slow breath, not like before. This one was deeper, not relief, not grief, surrender. It was the silence that changed first, not its absence, but its shape. For days, the quiet inside the house had been warm, sacred. It had wrapped around Ash and me like a blanket, waited, patient, careful. But that morning, it carried an edge. Like something had begun to shift beneath the surface. Like a held breath, finally preparing to exhale. Ash knew it before I did. He had risen early, long before the light changed. I found him by the front door, watching through the lower pane of glass, his breath fogging the window in slow intervals. Not anxious, but alert. A posture I hadn't seen since the beginning. He turned his head slightly as I approached, just enough to acknowledge me, then looked back outside. A white van sat parked across the street plane, unmarked, no movement. Inside just there, watching I stepped onto the porch, careful not to let the screen door creak. The van didn't move, but I noticed something I hadn't expected, a clipboard resting on the dashboard, a pair of eyes behind the windshield, partially obscured by a sun visor. They weren't looking at me, they were looking at the window just behind me, at the nursery. The presence didn't last long. By the time I stepped fully into the yard, the van had pulled away. No engine roar, no tire spin, just a quiet disappearance. But the shift remained. Ash hadn't left the window. He stood there, unmoving, eyes steady, and I realized then we had been alone long enough, that the world had begun to forget us, but now it was starting to remember. I spent that day moving through the house with more intention. I closed drawers that had sat open for weeks, swept away the loose strands of fur that had gathered near the baseboards, straightened the photograph wall. In the hallway, though I still left Ash's frame crooked, just as it had been. Somehow it felt right that way. Imperfect, honest, lived in. Ash followed me from room to room, not out of suspicion, but solidarity. Each step said the same thing. If you leave, I leave. If you stay, I stay. That afternoon, I returned to the stone. In the yard, the one marked only by M. The ground around it was soft, newly disturbed. Not enough to signal digging. Just the subtle shift of soil that comes when paws press close. Ash had been visiting again, alone this time, by evening. The sky had turned a pale shade of smoke, soft grays and bruised purples. The kind of sky that suggests rain but delivers only reflection. I sat in the nursery, candlelight flickering weakly on the walls. Ash lay near the crib, but he was awake, ears lifted, nose twitching slightly toward the open window. Then it happened. The air shifted, and from somewhere deep inside the crib, so faint I nearly missed it, came the sound. A breath, soft, deliberate, not mine. Not Ash's. I didn't move. Ash didn't either. But his body changed, just slightly. His tail thumped once. Then again, the kind of movement dogs make when their heart recognizes something before their mind does. He rose, walked to the side of the crib, and peered over. There was nothing visible. No shape, no shadow. But he stayed there, head low, ears soft, breathing slowly. Then he laid back down and rested his head against the leg of the crib, guarding not out of duty, but love. The next day, I returned to the shelter. I hadn't been back. Since Ash had chosen to stay, I needed to check in, let them know where he was, what he'd become. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for. Permission, forgiveness, some kind of understanding I hadn't yet found in myself. Janine, the shelter manager, met me outside. She had the kind of face that aged with worry, the kind that wore empathy like a uniform. She glanced toward my car, as if expecting to see Ash inside. When I told her where he was, that he hadn't left the house, not once, She nodded slowly. You know that place is marked, right? She said. Marked. She hesitated. By the city. For demolition. Not yet, but soon. The words landed like ash in the lungs. I had known somewhere inside me, but hearing it aloud brought a finality I wasn't ready for. Janine softened. They say no one lived there. No record of survivors. Family moved away or disappeared. I shook my head. Someone lived there. Someone still does. She studied me for a long time. Are you asking us to hold him? No, I said quietly. I'm asking you to trust him. She didn't speak for a while, but when I turned to leave, she called out softly, He won't leave on his own. You know that, right? I nodded. I won't either. That evening, I returned to the nursery with new sheets and a basket of items the shelter had donated, old plush toys, a freshwater bowl, a pillow. Ash inspected each item with slow interest, but he returned to the crib before I had even unpacked everything. That night, I stayed up listening to wind through the trees, to footsteps that didn't always sound like mine, to the low, gentle breathing of a dog who had once been lost and who now had found something worth protecting again. And, just before sleep found me, I heard it once more, a sigh, soft, delicate, and unmistakably alive. The next morning, I wasn't alone. A social worker knocked just after sunrise, polite clipboard in hand, laminated badge swinging against her scarf. She didn't force her way in. She didn't ask to inspect the property. She simply stood there, eyes kind, waiting. I'm here because someone filed a report, she said, about a dog and a child. I didn't speak, just stepped aside, letting the door open. Ash was lying by the crib, still calm. The woman's eyes softened the moment she saw him. She stepped closer, slowly, and looked inside the nursery. Her lips parted, as if to speak, then closed, and something in her posture changed. Recognition, grief, wonder. I thought this house was empty, she said. It was, I replied. We stood there for several minutes, saying nothing more, before she left. She crouched beside Ash. He didn't move. She didn't touch him, but she whispered something I'll never forget. Thank you for not letting go. The city notice came in the form of a yellow tag stapled to the front gate, fluorescent, laminated, official. Property condemned, final clearance, pending demolition. 14 Daisy read the words without reacting, folded the tag neatly into thirds, slipped it into the inside pocket of my coat. Ash stood just behind the screen door, nose pressed to the frame. He hadn't barked. He never did. But his presence was enough, quiet, steady, watching. I opened the door. He stepped back to let me in, then turned toward the hallway without a sound, back to the crib, back to Milo. The nursery hadn't changed, it never did, not in any way the world could measure. But to those who paid attention, who really saw everything had changed. The way the stuffed bear now sat propped upright, always in the same corner, the way the blue blanket never lay quite flat, always curled slightly at the edge, like fingers had tugged it in sleep, and the way Ash had started sleeping closer, not just beside the crib, but curled partially beneath it, his body shielding the space like a gate that would not open. 14 days. That was all we had. I'd called Janine that night. She answered on the second ring. I read the notice. She said before I spoke. Of course she had. I'm not asking for anything, I told her. Not yet. You will, she said. Not unkindly. Just honestly. There was a pause. Has anyone come for him? No, I said, but he's still waiting. For the child. I closed my eyes. For something. Another pause. You know the law, right? She said gently. About abandoned animals. Once a residence is cleared, I know, I whispered. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. That week, it rained. A slow, steady rain that never quite let up. It soaked the grass, streaked the windows, pooled in the gutters. The kind of rain that makes time feel slower, heavier, harder to hold. Ash stayed in the nursery through it all. Sometimes he would lift his head and stare toward the window, his eyes tracking something I couldn't see. Once, I swore I saw his ears flick toward the sound of tiny fingers tapping a soft, rhythmic bed against the glass. But when I looked, the handprint was already fading. The social worker came back on the 7th day. She didn't knock this time. Just stood at the gate, coat drawn tightly around her, clipboard in hand. I met her outside. There's been pressure, she said, from housing, from animal control. I didn't respond. They say you've been squatting here. I looked past her to the sidewalk. It wasn't empty. Her expression softened. I know, but the city doesn't believe in ghosts. She didn't smile. Not exactly, but there was a sadness in her eyes I hadn't seen the first time. Can I come in? I nodded. Inside the house was as quiet as ever. She walked to the nursery without needing directions. She moved slowly, hands tucked into her sleeves, careful not to disrupt anything. When she reached the crib, she froze. Ash was lying beneath it again, not sleeping, just waiting. There was something in the air, not cold, not warm. Still she crouched. This room, she whispered. It remembers, I said. She nodded. After a long moment, she rose and turned to me. You need to find somewhere else to bring him. Her voice was gentle, but final. There isn't anywhere else, I said. There has to be. I shook my head. He won't leave. Not without him. She didn't ask who I meant. She knew, and maybe that scared her more than anything. Later that evening, I sat beside the crib and watched Ash sleep. His breathing was slow, but not deep. His paws twitched occasionally, the way they do when dogs dream of running. I wondered what he saw. The yard, the stone, Claire, Milo, or maybe just the shape of a life that had once made sense. I didn't sleep much that night, and when I did, I dreamt of demolition crews, of walls falling inward, of cribs swallowed by dust, and of a dog, unmoving as the ceiling caved in around him. On the 8th day, I left the house before sunrise. I needed to think. I needed air. I needed to see the world beyond the cracked glass and flickering candlelight of that nursery. The city felt different now, too loud, too fast. The sound of buses, of metal grates being dragged open, of voices rising for no reason at all. I bought a coffee and didn't drink it. Walked through a park I didn't recognize. Found myself at the shelter. Again, Janine was inside, sorting blankets. She didn't speak as I entered, but she didn't look surprised to see me. I can take him, she said. I didn't answer. He wouldn't be in a cage. He wouldn't be alone. Still, I said nothing. She looked at me. He wouldn't be there, I know. I sat on the floor beside the counter. She didn't stop me, and we sat like that for a long time too. People waiting for a decision that hadn't been made. That night, I told Ash everything about the notice, about the law, about the shelter. He didn't react, but when I was finished speaking, he stood, walked to the crib, and placed his paw against one of the lower slats. Just once, a quiet gesture, final, resolute. I sat beside him. Okay, I said, we'll stay. On the 9th day, the girl returned, the one from the sidewalk, curls bouncing, hand in her mother's. They paused outside the gate. The woman didn't look at the house, but the girl did. She pointed. Again, doggies home. Then, quieter, babies too. The woman pulled her away, but the girl looked back one last time, waved not at me at the window, and the curtain, unmoved by breeze, untouched by hand, shifted slightly. Ash watched from the hallway, his tail lifted once, then lowered. There were 5 days left. The walls were starting to thin, not literally, not yet, but in the way things do. When time is running out, the silence no longer wrapped us. It pressed in, insistent, urgent. Ash stayed close. The bear stayed in the crib. The pacifier lay nestled beside it, exactly where it had been, and I knew, without being told, something had to give, and soon. The demolition notice was still stapled to the gate. It flapped gently in the wind now, edges curled and fraying, like it was embarrassed by its own presence, like it knew it didn't belong here. But the city wouldn't forget. 4 days remained. I'd stopped counting hours. Time had begun to feel like fabric, pulled thin across each moment. Every breath inside the house stretched into something longer than it was supposed to be. Ash hadn't moved from the nursery. Since the 9th day, he didn't eat much anymore. He drank when I asked him to. But everything else, every instinct, every motion, was stillness, as though he were conserving what was left of himself for something final, something sacred. I slept on the floor beside him now. Every night, and every night, the same things happened in the same rhythm. Ash would rise once and check the crib. The bear would be slightly moved. The blanket subtly shifted, and once, only once, I woke to the sound of a soft coo, not crying, not speaking, just the kind of sound a baby makes in a dream. Ash's ears had flicked. Mine, too. But neither of us moved. We didn't need to. The child was there, in ways that no one else would believe. That morning, the city came back. Not the van this time. 2 men in orange vests, a clipboard, and a woman from code enforcement whose mouth was set like a line someone had drawn too tightly. She stood on the sidewalk and shouted my name once. I met them outside. Ash stayed at the window, behind the curtain. I've filed for an extension, I said before they could speak. Emergency preservation. Temporary hold. I submitted the paperwork yesterday. She raised her eyebrows. You're not the owner. I have the key? She studied me. That doesn't make you legal. There's a living being inside, an unregistered animal. No, I said, quieter now. A presence. The clipboard man shifted awkwardly. The younger of the 2, in vests, squinted toward the house. What kind of presence? The woman turned. That's not our job. I didn't flinch. It should be. She sighed. You have until Friday. The hold will be reviewed. But if it's denied, she let the sentence dangle. Not a threat, just a promise wrapped in bureaucracy. I nodded. Understood. Inside, Ash met me at the door, not urgently. Just there like he always was. I sat beside him in the nursery. Ran my hand once, gently, along the space between his shoulder blades. He didn't react, just watched the crib. The candle I had lit the night before had burned itself to a stump, and still, the blue blanket had moved. That night, I drove without direction, past the town, past the lights. I ended up on a hill overlooking the city, the same place I used to go when I needed to feel far away from everything I couldn't fix. I brought the photo with me, the one of Milo in the hospital bassinet, name written in the margin. I held it beneath the dome light, staring at the way his hand curled toward his own cheek, the way his eyes, though closed, seemed to be looking toward something none of us could see. Then I flipped it over. I hadn't done that before. On the back, in faint pencil, was a date, and beneath it, if anything happens, take care of him. He's all Ash has. It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. I sat in the car until the moon shifted behind the clouds. Then I went home. When I returned, Ash was still in the nursery. But something had changed. His head was resting against the leg of the crib, as always. But his body was stretched further, reaching into the small open space where the baseboard had cracked. And beside him, nestled against his side, the bear dot again. But this time, the pacifier was nowhere to be seen. I checked the floor, nothing. Checked the folds of the blanket, nothing. I sat, confused, watching. Then Ash shifted slightly, and I saw it, the pacifier, tucked beneath his paw, like a gift, like an offering, as if he knew something I didn't. The next morning, Janine came unannounced. She stood in the doorway, like someone preparing to deliver bad news. I brought her inside. Without speaking, she followed me down the hall, paused at the nursery. Ash lifted his head. She froze. "He's older than I thought," she whispered. "He's been waiting a long time," I said. Janine stepped into the room. Slowly, she crouched beside him. This time, Ash didn't turn away. He let her presence settle. "Is it real?" she asked softly. I didn't answer. She placed a small stuffed rabbit on the floor. Ash sniffed it once, then pushed it gently, ever so gently, into the crib. 3 days. That's what the calendar said. But inside this house, time had stopped mattering. Ash moved like a monk in a chapel. I followed him. I lit candles at dusk. Janine brought blankets and soft food. The social worker returned once more. She didn't bring forms. She brought a photo, a grainy printout from the shelter archives. A woman, holding a baby, and next to her, Ash. Still young, still proud. Milo was never registered in the system, she said. No birth certificate filed in the county. But there's a record of Claire's intake at the shelter, a wellness check. She mentioned postpartum, grief. She paused. She said she was afraid of losing him. Why? She didn't say. I studied the photo, then looked at Ash. I think she knew something we didn't. That night, the rain returned, and with it, something else, movement, soft, rhythmic. I watched as Ash rose slowly, walked to the crib, and froze. For just 1 second, the light from the candle caught something I'll never be able to prove. A shape. Small, curled, resting beneath the blue blanket. And just before the flame flickered out, I heard it again. A sigh, and Ash let out one in return. A matched breath, a mirrored life. A promise, held for too long, finally answered. On the 12th morning, the front gate was chained. No warning, no knock. Just thick rusted links, and a lock that hadn't been there the day before. A notice flapped against the fence post. Larger this time, plastic sealed against the rain. Final clearance, 48 HOUR sit. Didn't say if it, said when. Ash stood at the window, watching me as I stepped back from the gate. My hand still cold from touching the metal. He didn't whine, he didn't move, but the tension in him, I saw it. That subtle lift in the shoulders. That silent calculation. Something had shifted in both of us. We had counted our days like candles. Now the last one had been lit. I climbed the side fence to get in. It wasn't graceful. The wood sagged under my weight. My boot caught a nailhead. My jacket tore. But none of that mattered. When I landed hard. On the other side, Ash was waiting. He padded toward me across the damp grass. The rattle still clutched gently in his mouth. He placed it at my feet, then turned, leading me back into the house. No words passed between us, but the message was clear. You came back. Now we finish this. Inside, the nursery felt untouched, unbothered by locks or chains or yellow notices. The crib stood steady in the morning light. Blanket folded in that imperfect way it always was, like someone had just risen from beneath. The bear sat upright. The pacifier nestled between its arms. Ash lay down beside the crib without hesitation. I sat next to him. We waited not for rescue, not even for proof, but for the moment to come. The one we both knew would ask more of us than any before. It came at dusk. A truck pulled into the driveway with that mechanical groan that says it doesn't care who it wakes. 2 men stepped out. One carried a clipboard. The other wore a vest. Neither one of them looked cruel, but they didn't look like they believed in the things that happened inside this house, either. I met them at the porch. No, one's authorized to enter, one said. There's a liability concern. I'm not asking to stay forever, I replied. Just tonight. He looked toward the house, toward the faint golden flicker of the candle in the nursery window. It's condemned, he said. know that. So was Ash, I said softly. But he stayed. They didn't respond, just stepped back, murmured to each other. Then one turned to me. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. I nodded, and they left. Inside, I found Janine waiting. She had come through the back door, somehow slipping past the barriers, as easily as breath through a crack in the window. She didn't say anything at first, just sat down. On the floor beside the crib, Ash rose and walked to her, rested his head gently in her lap. I can't take him, she said quietly. I looked up. What? I can't, she repeated, not after seeing this. She ran a hand through Ash's fur, slow, deliberate. He's not looking for a new home. He already found his. Her voice broke slightly on the last word. I swallowed. I don't know what happens after tomorrow, I said, but I can't walk him out of here. Not unless you won't have to, she said. That night, I packed everything, to leave, to honor, every toy, every photo, every scribbled drawing. I placed the rattle beside the stone in the backyard. I folded the flannel blanket as tightly as I could and laid it in the crib with care. Then I lit 2 candles, one for Claire, and one for the boy she never stopped. Loving. Ash stood beside me, unmoving, as if waiting for permission to breathe. I whispered into the stillness, "We're not leaving, not tonight." And for the first time, Ash leaned his body fully into mine. Weight, heat, trust, he sighed, and I realized what I'd known all along. He wasn't guarding a memory, he was living with it. The sound came just before dawn, boots on the front porch, 3 of them. Voices, low, uncertain. I didn't move. Ash stood, ears alert, but unafraid. We waited. The door opened slowly. The social worker stepped through. She was followed by a man I didn't recognize, older, gray-bearded, wearing a faded city inspector's badge and the kind of expression you don't argue with. And behind them both, a third figure, a woman, mid-30s, quiet, eyes. She held a clipboard in one hand and a folded piece of paper in the other. No one spoke for a long time. Ash didn't move from his place beside the crib. He didn't need to. The woman stepped forward. Her voice was soft. "Did you find the letter?" I stared at her, then reached into the drawer where I'd placed the sealed envelope. Weeks ago, the one I had never opened. I held it out. She nodded. "It's addressed to you. I don't know who. I'm her sister," she said. "Claire's." She stepped forward, unfolding the paper she held, a printout of a photo. Claire. Smiling. Holding Milo. And beside her, Ash, younger, but unmistakable. "He wouldn't leave," she said, "even after the hospital, after Claire lost him." I closed my eyes. "He stayed." She nodded. "He followed her home, slept beside the crib. After the fire, after the relapse, he wouldn't go." Her voice broke. "I tried to take him. I did, but he ran." We both looked at Ash. He looked back, still patient, as if he knew, she said, as if he was still waiting. She looked around the room. This place shouldn't exist, and yet, it's more alive than anything I've seen in years. The man with the badge cleared his throat. "The notice will expire tomorrow. The property will be reassessed." I blinked. "You're not demolishing." He shook his head. "Not today." The social worker stepped forward. "We can't list Milo. There's no legal record, no registry. But," she looked at Ash. Then at me, "if he says the child's still here, I believe him. They left before sunrise, without forms, without instructions, just silence." And a single nod from the woman as she stepped through the door. "I'll come back," she said, "to check in." I nodded. Ash stayed at the crib until the light returned to the window, and I sat beside him, hands folded, breathing slow. Outside, the world moved on. Inside, nothing had changed, and everything had. The next morning came like a held breath finally exhaled. No trucks, no boots on gravel, no warnings stapled to the gate, just sunlight, pale and golden, like a prayer poured through the cracked nursery window. The kind of light that doesn't demand attention, but blesses whatever it touches. Ash had not moved from the crib. He lay there, curled just close enough for his shoulder to brush the wood, his eyes open, watching the blanket rise slightly at the corner in that same way it always did. A quiet illusion, maybe, or not. The bear was where it always was, the pacifier beside it. The green blanket folded on the floor where I had slept. The house was silent, but it no longer felt abandoned. It felt held. I didn't speak that morning, neither did Ash. We simply sat. He watched the crib. I watched him, and somewhere between our breathing, I understood what I hadn't dared to accept before. He had never been waiting for someone to come back. He had been waiting for someone to understand why he stayed. Later, I lit a new candle. There was no ritual to it. No reason beyond the feeling that something quiet should always be met with warmth. Its glow flickered against the far wall, reflecting softly in the window glass. I turned once and saw it, not the reflection of myself, but the softest blur. Pressed into the glass again, a handprint, smaller than mine, fogged just enough to make me blink, and beside it, faint, but unmistakable, a smudge. As if a dog's nose had been pressed gently alongside it. Ash remained where he was, still, sacred. The light bathed his fur, and for the first time in days, I saw no tension in his posture, only peace by mid-app. I stepped into the backyard again. I brought with me the last of the photographs, the baby rattle, and a small wooden sign I had carved by hand the night before. No names, no dates, just a single word. Stay. I knelt by the stone, the letter M, still, etched in its face. I placed the rattle beside it, tucked the photo beneath a small glass jar to protect it from the wind. Then I drove the sign gently into the ground. Ash had followed me out. He stood behind me in the grass, his breath slow and even. I looked back at him, and he met my eyes, and I knew, without sound or gesture, this was his answer. He wasn't guarding the dead. He was protecting the part of life that stays behind when everything else leaves. Love, memory, the last shape of a child's breath. That night, the social worker returned. She didn't bring papers. She brought a blanket, pale yellow, hand-knit, worn around the edges. I found it in a storage bin, she said. From Claire's things. I think it belonged here. I took it without speaking. Ash followed us into the nursery. I laid the blanket in the crib. Ash walked to it, lowered his nose, then slowly, reverently, he placed one paw against the base of the crib and leaned forward, his head resting against the folded edge of the yellow fabric. A long sigh left his chest. A final one, not of grief, but release. She stayed for a little while, the woman, not watching, not evaluating, just present. She sat on the floor across from me and stared at the candlelight flickering across the walls. You know, she said, there's nothing legal I can do for this house, I know, but I can keep the file open. I can make sure no one signs the demolition order for a while. How long is a while? She gave a small smile. Long enough. We sat together in silence after that, until she stood, gave Ash a final glance, and whispered, "Good night, little one," to the crib, before slipping out the door. I stayed awake that night. I watched Ash sleep for the first time without stirring, his body loose, his chest rising in slow, even rhythm. At one point, just before dawn, I thought I heard movement, not footsteps, not voices, just breath. Two patterns, in sync, one long and low, one small and fluttered, like a bird resting its wings. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Some moments don't ask for witnesses. They just ask to be felt by morning. The house had changed, not in structure, not in scent, but in something deeper. The air no longer heavy, the silence no longer. Morning. Ash stood at the edge of the crib, then walked to me, and rested his head on my knee. I placed my hand on the top of his skull, fingers threading through fur that had grown thinner in the last few weeks. "You did good," I whispered. He blinked slowly, then turned back toward the crib and lay down just once more. I stayed until the candle burned out. Then I opened the windows. Let the wind move through. Let the light stretch across the floor. Let the world in, just enough to say, we are still here. Sometimes, I still visit the house. It's never locked. No one claims it now. The city forgets things when no one fights to keep them. But Ash is there, always by the crib, always with that soft breath, steady and slow. And when the wind shifts just right, and the sunlight lands across the edge of the mattress, I still see it, that subtle indent, that tiny shape, like a child, finally asleep, safe, watched over home. In the end, there was no miracle, no headlines, no rescue team or dramatic adoption. Just a dog who wouldn't leave, and a child who never really did. And in between them, a silence that became love, a house that remembered, a breath that lingered, a crib that never needed to be empty. And now, when people ask me why I stayed, why I risked so much for a place that no one wanted, I tell them the truth, the kind that doesn't ask for proof. I say, because sometimes love doesn't leave. It curls at the base of a crib and waits, quiet, watching, breathing, until the baby sleeps.